So as I say, this is our second, and I'm probably going to do a series of these. And so it's really good to have someone like yourself to join us. And for those who haven't seen these kind of calls before, obviously Public Sector Group is available to any PRCA member in the public sector. And really, this is just a kind of conversation about you, David, and to find out about how you got to where you were, and to talk about kind of the industry, and look at how people can attain such exalted heights such as yourself. So what they need to do, really. So David, just to kind of kick off, can you just tell us a bit about yourself and what your role is?
Sure. So I'm Director of Communications at the Local Government Association, or the voice of the national voice of local government. So our role is to support local councils in England and Wales, and that's a combination of support and improvement work with them, sharing best practice across local government, and also on the other side of the fence, it's around working with government, sometimes lobbying government, to ensure that proposed or current legislation is workable for councils and ultimately for their local communities. So obviously over the last 7 or 8 months or so, that work has ramped up considerably, and particularly our work with central government to ensure that we're supporting the national effort locally.
And so, yeah, so you're kind of providing a link between local government and national government. I know there's other touch points for people in the public sector as well for that, but I'm assuming it's been quite a challenging time for you.
It has, but certainly not as challenging for our councils, who are, really on the front line of supporting their communities, keeping their residents safe, helping to keep their local businesses as strong as they possibly can, and their local economies as strong as they possibly can, and as I say, supporting the national effort during the pandemic. So we're one of the links into central government, but as you say, there are many more. But it's really the magnificence of local government, both sort of the political leadership and the managerial leadership of local councils, that has really made a difference to local communities.
Yeah, I kind of feel that, I mean, it's a terrible thing, COVID, but it's kind of enabled local government and other public sector colleagues to shine, because people in the past may have had negative thoughts about public sector, and over the years we know that public sector's got less and less money from government, but actually now that's turned on its head, isn't it, really?
Well, people trust decisions made at the most local level, and that's not just us saying that. From all of our polling, people feel that locally elected leaders understand their local communities and their local areas best, and so they'll make decisions locally that are in the best interests of local areas, local communities, local businesses. So certainly it has shone a light on those local relationships between local councils and their residents.
Yeah. So thinking about your role now, how did you get to where you were today then? Tell us a bit about your background and how you got there.
So my background, I've been working in the communications profession since 1987. Started in internal communications and parliamentary briefing, an interesting mix, but that was a unit within the Metropolitan Police Service. So interestingly, really started with a kind of focus on staff engagement and internal communication, which of course over the last period has really come to the fore as absolutely vital for organisations across the public and the private sector. As people are working differently, that link to the workforce has been even more vital. So that's how I started my communications career, and then within the Metropolitan Police Service, I was lucky enough to have lots and lots of opportunity to develop my wider communication skills. So lots of hard news work, working with the media, working on some really big and historic events, Diana's funeral, the Docklands bomb, the Paddington Rail disaster, to name but some. I did some work with the Bulgarian police service when they were setting up community policing in Bulgaria, worked with them and the Foreign Office to set up what for them, were new things. Press offices hadn't really sort of, worked in that way before. So, that was sort of hugely exciting. And then sort of got to the point really where I'd kind of done as much as I could within that kind of working environment, and was looking for a new challenge. So then moved into local government. I've worked in 2 councils, including a London council, and then after that came to the Local Government Association. During that period in local government, I was also chair of an organisation called LG Comms for 4 years, which is the professional body for council communicators. So I was able to take sort of that national experience from that role into the current one at the Local Government Association.
And how do you think things have changed in local government over the years?
So I think the speed of communications, when I started, you were literally faxing press releases and picking the phone up. Now things are being reported before you've even thought about a press release. Right. Obviously, the digital kind of landscape has changed, beyond recognition, and in many ways, citizens are the reporters, and then reporters in the traditional sense kind of frame the conversations and the debates. So I think it's changed in that way. I think the other really big change is everything we do needing to be evidence-based, but also kind of proving the value of what we do. Just reams and reams of sort of bits of sort of photocopied press coverage, is now obsolete. And it's not even about media coverage, because what does that mean? It could be media coverage that is not positive or doesn't address any of your sort of key messages. It's really about the impact of what we're doing is making, and particularly around things like behaviour change. Are people changing their behaviours as a result of the communications activity that we're delivering?
And that's a big change, isn't it? Because I'm just thinking back just previously where you're talking about media coverage, and I know, for example, around a council I'm working at, we've got more people read our e-newsletter than read the local paper, and so the world is clearly different than when we both first started as probably young people in communications.
I mean, some councils have got e-newsletters with 85,000 residents signed up. I mean, that is, that's huge. And I think, we're in and it's the right place to be in, but we're in a place now where, and it's not just local government or the public sector, where, no longer are people being told how to consume information. They are telling us how they want their information, and that's right. That's absolutely the right place to be in. But it has moved a significant way in a relatively short space of time, actually.
Definitely. The sun has come out, so I'm hopeful you can still see me. It's one of those wonderful days, autumn days, isn't it?
The sun's always shining on you, Marcus.
That's very nice of you to say so. So what do you think? I mean, you kind of started talking about it. So what do you think the challenges are now for comms people working, local government and the public sector across the piece?
Well, I think the last 7 or 8 months have shown that the challenges are actually not just work related. It's about, making sure that we do everything we can to make sure that our teams are doing okay. Frankly, it has been a difficult period. It's a period in the country's history that will be studied by generations to come. So, working through all of that has meant that, we're not just looking at the work we're doing, we're also looking at, more closely at whether the people that doing that work are okay as well. And again, that's the right thing to do. I touched on internal communications, and this period has absolutely shown the value of strong internal communications and staff engagement. That should actually have always been the case, but sometimes it gets sort of seen a little bit as the poor relation, but it's absolutely not. And I think that many organisations, including my own, have seen the progress in terms of that staff engagement over the last period, and we'll never go back now. People now expect that level of engagement, and again, that's a good thing. It can only be a good thing.
And I suppose the other challenge is, like we're both working at home at the moment. So as you're saying, it is really important. And there's the other aspect, isn't there, about the kind of mental support and welfare we need to give those people. I know there's still many people working on the ground, on the front line, in local authorities, but there's also many people working in the front line, but from their home office, be it kitchen, bedroom, or wherever else. And that's one of the other challenging things about this, isn't it?
It is, and actually finding ways to support people that, it's different, from person to person. So, it's about having a range of options to make sure that, we're regularly checking in on people, and that people are, are doing okay. So, again, this is stuff that is important. And my own view is, we should never look back, really. Any ground we've made up around this agenda, is ground that we should absolutely, not lose looking forwards.
No, I totally agree with you. Just thinking about some of the comms challenges again, and one of the things I'm starting to see more and more again is, more and more actually is, it's been called fake news, but disinformation and misinformation, especially around COVID, Brexit before that. And so it's one of the kind of the new challenges we now face through social media. I'm sure you're seeing a lot of that as well.
Yeah, and I think what's important around that agenda is that finding those trusted voices, which might not always be, local government or national government. So, lots of councils have been working with community champions, and those community champions are trusted in their, very, very local, hyper local even areas, and they're trusted voices to either amplify important messages or to allay any kind of fears or myths. I think it goes back to my point about, the kind of the speed of kind of information sharing these days is that, something can quite quickly take off, that isn't right, or isn't factually correct. And so, I think that there's a challenge for all of us that work in the public sector to ensure that we've got that range of voices that can help us, during some of those difficult times.
And kind of moving the questions on to something slightly different, is about careers. So you've obviously worked in the Met Police, and you work in local government, etc. How do you think it's difficult for people in the public sector to kind of move up the ranks? And what's your advice for those who are kind of ambitious?
Sure. So I think the first thing I'd say, genuinely, and I say this to people in my team, is that if I can get to be a director of communications, then anybody can, and I you know, I mean that absolutely, you know, honestly and genuinely. You know, I think that ambition is a good thing, and you know, people, you know, there should be no boundaries to kind of people's desires to move their careers on. I think that people that are kind of enthusiastic to learn, you know, enthusiasm can really get you so far, and you know, I think that is an important part of people's approach to sort of their careers. Definitely work still to do around diversity in our profession, and you know, that's across the full spectrum. And I know, Marcus, you and I have spoken about this before. Absolutely about you know, getting more women and people from different backgrounds, different, you know, ethnic backgrounds into those senior roles. But actually, for me, that diversity goes further as well, and it's around people from, you know, for example, different education backgrounds, different social backgrounds. So, you know, somebody leaves school at 16, you know, does an apprenticeship. There's no reason at all why they can't get to be Director of Communications, and they will bring a perspective that will be different to, you know, somebody that went to university, and you know, both perspectives are hugely valuable and really important. And I think, you know, that diversity of experience, you know, can only be a good thing for the profession.
I really agree with you there. And you know, the world has changed, and you know, you do need different skills and, you know, different ways of thinking. And I mean, there's a lot of work that's been going across PRCA and other places around making sure your teams reflect the communities you work in as well, especially when we're talking about local government, for example. So, you know, not everyone's in London or a big city, and you know, sometimes the pool might not be as large as other places, but actually it's not the wrong thing to do to make sure you do represent your community, is it?
I mean, yeah, particularly as an elected councillor, you know, that's what you're elected to do, is to represent your, you know, your local community. And I think that, you know, back to sort of talking about our profession, you know, it's really important to have role models so people can see, you know, people from different backgrounds getting on in the communications profession, and you know, and aspiring to that and wanting to you know, to get to those positions. And you know, for people like you know, you and me that have, you know, been doing this for a while, really important that we, you know, we play a role in all that. I'm learning something new every day in this role, and actually I'm learning most of that from, you know, people that are, you know, new into the profession or still on their kind of career journey, you know, and they're the ones with the sort of fresh ideas, fresh thinking, you know, and I think there's a, you know, there's a role for everybody in terms of ensuring that our profession is open to everyone, welcoming to everyone, and actually, you know, gives everybody, you know, the best opportunity to, you know, to develop their careers. You know, I've always said that when I interview anybody for a job, I want that interview to be the best interview they can possibly give, because I want the best person for the job. So, you know, we all need to work together to make sure that we're giving people the opportunity to be the best they possibly can be.
Yeah, I agree with you. And one of the things I've always said to people who work for me is, you know, I still enjoy learning and I never stop learning. The day you stop learning, you might as well move on somewhere else, because, you know, there's so much new stuff going on in comms, and it's always good to be on top of that. There's also so much you can learn from colleagues. Totally agree. Who is it that inspired you then, Dave? When you mentioned that, it made me think. I mean, I kind of know who inspired me, but who in your careers helped you get to where you were?
So I think when I was in the Metropolitan Police, you know, there were a couple of people who I could see doing this really exciting stuff with the media, and you know, I'd done the internal communication stuff and the parliamentary stuff, But it just seemed like another world, a really exciting world. And so somebody who was my first manager when I was sort of a trainee information officer, as they were called in those days, who remains a good friend to this day, somebody called Caroline Taylor, who which is somebody who really, we talk about it today, that she just let me run with stuff and really gave me that opportunity, and made a few mistakes along the way, as I'm sure everybody does. But I see some of that in some of the members of my team at the moment, where it just is thrilling, and my heart kind of bursts with pride to see some of the stuff that they're doing that has such a big impact, and I just think it's brilliant. And these are the people that are going to be the you and me of the future, and they're the ones we need to really make sure come through.
And thinking of that then, and going back to talking about careers earlier on, so we've spoken about this in the past as well, about being at the top table as well. And there's different schools of thought about what the top table is, I suppose. Is the top table actually sitting, so if in local government, is it about sitting with cabinet and the senior leadership team, or is it having the ear of the leader and the chief exec? So what are your thoughts about that?
So I think my experience has been that it's great to have the ear of the council leader or the chief executive, but to really get behind some of the sort of thinking and the strategy, being part of those discussions, is just really, really important. So you can understand some of the thinking, behind it. That's not to say that we've got to prove our value to them. If we're just there as passengers, then we're not really adding very much value. But if we're there, acting as that sort of trusted sounding board, scenario planning out how certain decisions may go, and what the implications of those decisions might be, that's adding value and helping them, in terms of their sort of strategic planning and their decision making. So, I think it is important to be, plugged into that senior level. And there's a phrase that I hear all the time, which, frankly, kind of just, and it's can you comms it? And you think about kind of the head of legal or the head of finance, they're in roles that their views are trusted quite properly. You don't want an organisation to go bust because you haven't managed your finance properly. You don't want to be, dragged through the courts because you've done something improper or possibly illegal. And it's the same way with communications. I think, if we can get senior leaders to understand that actually this is about often reputation, and reputation is a really difficult thing to get back. If you look at there are many high profile examples of organizations or individuals from, actually, interestingly, it tends to happen quite a lot in the private sector, but also the public sector, where misplaced decision or some misplaced words damage an individual's or an organization's reputation, and sometimes those things can't ever be repaired. So the being the guardian of an organization's reputation, and that's how I like to think of us as professional communicators, can be just as important as that finance role or that legal role.
I totally agree with you. And many a time I've started a conversation with, reputationally, this is how I'll impact you, and it does make a whole load of difference. And I quite often hear complaints about, I haven't got the right comms person, and but you get what you pay for, really, sometimes as well, don't you? Because if you're not willing to invest in comms, and you haven't got the right people advising you, and you're not asking for advice, then you're clearly asking for trouble, aren't you?
It is about, it is about providing that advice and guidance. And actually, sometimes as well, it's about looking at ways to support decisions. So, I can think of some examples where, policy decisions were made and were about to be implemented. And I've worked with some fantastic council leaders and chief executives who, before they take the leap, have asked for my views. And there are a number of occasions where I've said, well, look, let's just test this out with our residents, to see how it would land, what their views are, and if as is often the case, it's going to land well, then once you implement that new policy or that new approach, then in many ways you're doing what it is people were asking you to do, and it will be supported equally. And certainly in the current climate, sometimes you're having to make difficult decisions that maybe won't land so well, but if you understand that they're not going to land well and why they're not going to land well, at least then you can do some work to prepare the ground and explain to people why these difficult decisions are being made. And again, I sort of use the kind of analogy of, if you're traveling on a train or a bus or an airplane and you're sitting there for hours delayed and nobody tells you anything, you get really frustrated. If people explain to you why there's a delay and what the reasons are, you're more likely to kind of accept it and think, well, it's bad weather, or it's, a tree on the line or whatever. And then you accept that there's a good reason for it. But it's often when people don't communicate the reasons why something is the way it is that people start to get upset or angry, or they don't accept something. So it really is important to understand, even sometimes when you're making unpopular decisions, to understand why the communications around that is important.
No, I agree with you. I must admit, I haven't travelled on the train for about 6 months now because of working from home, but I'm pretty sure my local train company weren't very happy with me because I was often asking why trains were delayed, and they did up their game, which is good. And it just shows the value of communications, and we're finding that with residents as well, because to keep residents want to know what's going on, and that's where kind of sometimes making sure you're using that wide variety of channels like your e-newsletter to tell them that information is so helpful. And I think the other point is, just jumping back to what you were talking about, is I think with that kind of advisory role, part of what we learn in comms is that horizon scanning, isn't it? And I think many people forget what a skill that is. It's really important, and I'm sure you're using it all the time in your role.
Yeah, you're right. It's trying to anticipate what might come next, or I always say to people, and I learned this from my time in the Metropolitan Police, that when you're thinking about responding to something in the now, think about 2 years or 3 years time, and if, for example, there were a public inquiry, what would the decisions you're making today look like 2 or 3 years later, in a courtroom? So, looking ahead, thinking about the implications of what the decisions you're making today and what you're saying today as well. And that's not always easy because the world moves, as we've seen, moves very quickly, and sometimes it doesn't go in the way that you might anticipate. But I think part of the role of a good communicator is to kind of set out the sort of the what ifs, the potential ways that things may go. And sometimes that is being the person that sort of puts on the kind of cape and turns up the collar and presents a pretty bleak picture of the way things might be. I'd like to think of that as not being negative but being realistic about how things can play out, and actually if things don't play out in that way, then great. But if you've planned for them playing out in that way, then at least you know what you're dealing with, and you're able to offer that advice should that scenario play out in that way.
No, I agree, and I think one of the lessons I've learned in my career is honesty is really important. You know, being that honest, trusted person. Um, you know, I know people always like to hear great things, but actually that's not always the right thing to do. So just kind of thinking
Marcus,
about,
just
yeah,
picking up on that. I mean,
mm,
I probably like you know, I train people in terms of kind of you know, communications and media work and so on. And on the sorry issue, one of the things I say, which I really believe
mm,
is you know, if you say sorry and it's genuine, you know, there's actually very few places that people can go when you know, in terms of, you know, what you know, you're not sorry enough or be more sorry, you know,
mm.
and sometimes, you know, we make mistakes, we all make mistakes, and actually sometimes saying sorry, you know, is as simple as it's the right thing to do.
But it's learning as well, isn't it, from those mistakes? I think it's just as important because, like you know, I'm big enough to accept if I've made a mistake. I'd even say it to my, you know, I'll even say it to my team when, you know, they sometimes come up with better advice or answers to those questions. And you know, I think that's part of us growing as leaders, isn't it? About, you know, knowing those moments or appreciating you have made mistakes, but at the same time, you know, the leaders we work with, we're hoping that rubs off on them as well. You know, our political leaders and CEOs or whoever it is we're working to or with. So it's a massive lesson to learn. And just kind of horizon scanning, kind of last questions really. Um, what do you think will continue? Well, you know, I know COVID's obviously a big challenge, but you know, what other challenges do you see for communicators for the future?
For communicators, well, you know, I think we're going to need to keep looking for sort of even more innovative ways to communicate with people in a way that they want to be communicated with. In some ways, you know, the last few months has also got us, you know, in some ways back to basics. You know, those community sort of champions, those local voices. Sometimes, you know, it's as simple as small meetings,
Mm.
you know, in a place of worship or within, you know, small group of residents. You know, sometimes that really local stuff can make a really big difference. So, you know, I think that is going to remain with us. I think also, you know, the kind of the well-being issues will stay in place, and yeah, and rightly so. In the same way, you know, internal communications needs to, you know, now be seen in the same light as press, you know, media relations or digital or any of the other communications functions. You know, I hope will now be seen as an absolutely vital part of any good communications outfit in any organization, you know, anywhere, whether it's public, private, voluntary sector, you know, wherever that might be. I think, you know, also the kind of in the current climate, the ways of working, that sort of professional development stuff is a bit more challenging. And I think we're going to make sure that we are continuing to support colleagues, you know, so where they're able, they can still develop their careers and their own, you know, they can sort of, you know, sort of develop their own skills and their careers as well.
Yeah, it's so easy, especially in current times, to not think about your own development. And actually, you know, I'm often saying to people, you have permission to do that. You know, we're going to survive. Don't worry. You can take a day out and learn, and don't
And if
forget
you're, you
to.
know, I would say if you're, you know, if you're working in our profession, yeah, I'm a mentor for something called Women in PR, and honestly, I am learning as much from the person that I'm mentoring as I hope they're learning from me. And I would say to anybody, you know, if you haven't got a mentor, you know, particularly in you know, this current time, you know, I'd really think sort of seriously about getting a mentor, because, you know, that two-way sort of shared experience and knowledge is absolutely invaluable. And I think, you know, it can also help, you know, particularly in the sort of period that we're all working through. So, you know, those things are, you know, I think really valuable, and actually have become increasingly valuable over the last few months.
Yeah, it's really important. You're absolutely right, and that's one of the things actually that the public sector group are looking at. So about how can we encourage more people to think about mentors. And actually, you know, if you work in the public sector, it doesn't have to be someone else in the public sector. It could always be someone in the private sector, because they may have different skills or, you know, different points of view that will help you as well. So no, really, really important point. So no, I really appreciate you spending some time with us, David, and it's really good to see you. And I'm hopeful that, you know, like everybody else, you kind of are able to survive the working from home and all the various Zooms and team meetings and whatnot you're on, I'm sure, all day, every day. And, you know, you stay healthy as well. So
thanks, Marcus. Yeah, we're doing all right. And the same to you as well. Keep well and keep safe.
Yeah, we try to. Yeah, great. Thanks a lot. Thanks very much, David. It's really good.